Welcome to Anther Dish, the show about food, culture, and identity. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Dubnan. Here in Canada, we have a food security crisis and a cost of living crisis. While there are many, many factors that are shaping this as a continued issue across the country, one of the challenges in navigating food insecurity here is that we rely primarily on nonprofit food banks to support those in need. One nonprofit food organization in Toronto, Daily Bread, is on a mission to eliminate food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. Daily Bread prepares over 250,000 meals annually, including more than 43,000 heat and eat meals delivered through the Red Cross Mobile Food Bank to individuals facing barriers like mobility challenges, inadequate housing, or mental health conditions that make traditional food access difficult. In 2024, Toronto Food Bank visits hit an all-time high of 4.1 million, and Toronto declared a state of emergency about their food insecurity. In response, Daily Bread has seen their visits increase, and their food services manager, Michael Greenberg, oversees the kitchen that produced more than 270,000 meals between 2024 and 2025. Mike is here today to speak about the work that he and his team do at Daily Bread to ensure that the food bank kitchen can logistically maintain itself with such high demands, the nutritional and social impact of food insecurity for clients who cannot prepare their own meals, and the vital role that food banks play in advocating for equity and dignity in food access. Here's my conversation with Mike. All right, welcome to the show, Mike. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm really excited to talk with you. Before we can jump into the topic today, do you mind giving a bit of background about who you are, where you're coming in from, and the type of work that you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Mike Greenberg. I've been a chef for about 25 years. I started my career in restaurants in Toronto while I was a teenager. I pursued an academic degree in criminology and psychology throughout my kind of early adulthood, but my passion was always food. I spent most of my time all through university working in restaurants and just gaining experience in the food world. And I kind of, when I finished my degree, I just gravitated back to the restaurant world, and I just remained here ever since. Probably much to the chagrin of my parents, but I'm still, 25 years later, working in the food industry. I've changed kind of my approach to cooking. I was once very fond of fine dining restaurants. I've moved away from that. Now I work as the chef, food services manager at Daily Bread Food Bank here in Toronto, where I still cook nonstop all day long and think about all things food. But I do that obviously in a very different context and for a very different audience.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated about that transition for you too, because the shift from like fine dining settings to non-for-profit food is quite significant and not something that you see too often. So can you kind of speak to what that transition was like for you? Was it a very natural process, or were there some bumps in the road as you were learning the...
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, cooking is cooking, whether you're plating food with tweezers or you're cooking in large batch, quantities for, clients around the city. The fundamentals are basically the same. So I don't really see much of a difference in terms of the actual workload. I do, however, notice a very substantial difference when it comes to my personal life, my ability to to work and support my family and be present with my family and children, which is why I've moved into, let's say, a more office hour type job. We cook a lot of really, really nice food here, and whether or not it's quote unquote fancy, we put our love and our care into everything we do. And I approach the cooking that we do here as though I do work at a fine dining restaurant.
Oh, I love that. And I think, I remember working in restaurants when I had my daughter. It was very tricky in terms of like that work-life balance just because of the hours. So I can definitely appreciate that transition creates perhaps a bit more balance with that too.
Absolutely.
And the point that you make too about not necessarily whether or not food is fancy, but the idea of thoughtful approaches to food is a really important distinction here as well, right? So for those that aren't really familiar with the Daily Bread, do you mind giving a bit of background on what this organization does, what the mission is, and how it operates?
Yeah. So Daily Bread Food Bank is a large charity organization located in Southern Etobicoke, serving the needs of clients in the GTA. I always kind of mention to people that it's a bit of a misnomer because Daily Bread Food Bank isn't exactly a food bank. What we are is a distributor to, a couple hundred food bank programs around the city. So it kind of creates this impression that we are an active food bank. It's a much bigger operation than that. We have a number of agencies that we distribute food to. And this is basically the main hub where we receive the food, we sort some of it, we do large scale procurement, and then we then transport those goods to food bank programs around the city. So Daily Bread is focused on eliminating food insecurity in Toronto and advocating against poverty and food insecurity. We spend most of our time quite simply distributing food to needed programs, but we also have a research and advocacy arm here where they study and they research, disseminate the information that they gather about the state of food insecurity in Toronto, whether things are getting better or worse. We have an information and referral department where we help, connect clients with the resources they need to be able to maybe access, government programs or housing or any number of things. So, Daily Bread is far bigger than what many people think it is. It's
Yeah.
a very large scale organization in that we have our hands on a lot of different things. I think most people, when they come through the doors of the building, are often taken aback by just the scope of what we do in the large scale kind of our operation. And that speaks sadly to the great need for all of those said kind of services that we offer in this day and age.
Yeah, 100%. Do you mind sharing a bit of the types of meals that you're preparing as well? Because I think for a lot of people, when they think about food banks, they think about non-perishable goods that they can donate. But my understanding is like what you're creating is a much more dignified meal-based sort of approach too, right?
Yeah, so we make any number of things. I should probably mention that the kitchen has a few different, things that we do, right? One of which is we have a large production kitchen where we make several thousand meals a week for agencies around the city. Another function of the kitchen is that we have an on-site cafeteria to feed our volunteers and some of our staff when they're on site. And then, of course, we have other food events that take place that we're a part of. But the production kitchen, which is pretty much the main focus of what we do here, we make food, soups and casseroles for agencies all around the city. And every week we send out a menu, and that is, perused by our agency members. And if they like, they can order food from us to serve at drop-in centers or shelters or wherever it happens to be. And we focus on very fresh, healthy foods. We're very considerate of, the sodium content, the sugar content. We want to make just honest food made from normal, fresh, raw ingredients. And we want to, put love and care into them. We want to make them culturally diverse. We want to make them flavorful. We want to make them healthy, and we do our best to make sure that our repertoire is appreciated and and if nothing more is enjoyed by a lot of people around the city.
Which is wonderful because Toronto is one of those places too, when it comes to food, that is such a diverse and diasporic experience for most people that are coming in to eat at restaurants as well. So the fact that that's reflected in the meal offerings through Daily Bread is also pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges of the job because we might make 4 items every week. And those items are sent far and wide across the city, and they land in very different communities. And those communities are comprised of very different people with different backgrounds. So to make one item that's going to land in every community around the city, it's very difficult because, Southern Etobicoke, where we are, we have a large, Ukrainian population, and they love when we make borscht and we make those kind of Eastern European foods. Those items aren't really preferred when we talk about some of the other neighborhoods, right? And vice versa. So it's always a struggle to find something that everyone's going to like. And, we do our best, and we understand that there are going to be times that people, don't prefer what we make, but we just want to make sure that our food is tasty, healthy, and, represents the diversity of Toronto.
Awesome. So, this is a pretty large scale approach, as you said. What logistically is needed in order to maintain the level of service and work that is functioning at Daily Bread right now?
Well, it takes a lot of planning and the logistics of cooking, 6,000 meals every single week is great. And we need to rely very heavily on suppliers, local suppliers. We want to make sure that we're able to, to keep up with our workload. I mean, our numbers keep growing in a way that's concerning. It really means that from time to time we have to look at what we're doing and we have to make sure things are feasible, in terms of time and energy. There was a time when we were servicing a lot less people that we were able to make, things like stuffed peppers and, breaded fish fillets and all sorts of stuff, just simply due to the fact that we're making, thousands and thousands of meals every week. We've had to kind of pivot to more, stew-like meals and things that are a little less labor intensive, sadly.
That makes sense though too. Yeah, in terms of being able to produce for like a wider amount of need too. So thinking about the client base, whether it be who's accessing the meals, what are some of the barriers in terms of people coming to the food banks and eating these meals? What are some of the barriers that they're facing, either nutritionally or socially?
Well, there are a number of barriers that people experience when trying to access food, whether it be at meal programs or at food banks. Geographical issues are often a problem. I mean, there are food banks throughout the city, but there are large gaps where there are kind of areas where people have to travel really far to get to these food banks, right? And that kind of ties into some of the economic issues that people deal with because, sadly, as we look at our statistics here, after paying household costs and utilities, survey respondents had a median of just $8.33 per person left at the end of the day for other expenses. And if you have to spend $7 or close to it to take the TTC to these meal programs or to the food bank, I mean, this is really cutting into your bottom line, and that's certainly a barrier. And then, of course, we have many, many individuals who access the food bank and meal programs are people with disabilities, and they might not be able to access these resources in the way that other people are. We have partnerships with many other, organizations, including Red Cross Canada, where we make single serve meals and we have them distributed through their mobile food program, particularly for seniors around the city that have issues with mobility and accessing the food bank. So we do our best to make sure that we get enough food out into the community and that for those who have barriers, physical barriers of accessing the food bank, we can bring food to them in certain circumstances.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think too about the TTC, like, even just like the amount of time needed to travel and how it's not always a guarantee that you're going to be able to get to where you need to be if a subway line is down or things like that too. It all adds up to those access issues.
Yeah, and back to your question about who's accessing these food banks and these meal programs. Sadly, 1 in 10 Torontonians are accessing resources
Yeah.
from food banks. It's no longer the people that you think are accessing these food banks. It might be your colleague, it might be the senior next door, it might be the children in the class with your kids. I mean, we've come to a point where the affordability crisis in Toronto is just so great that many people rely on food banks to be able to make ends meet. And
Yeah.
it's now basically across all demographics and across all cultures and whatnot. We've come to a point where, when 1 in 4 children in the city don't have food security and 1 in 10 Torontonians are accessing food banks, that should probably tell you that quite a lot of people are accessing these resources and a lot of people that you might not think they would.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I have regularly read the Who's Hungry reports through Daily Bread because I find that even from as a researcher, a very um, good and stark reminder of just how bad it's getting. And I think too about Olivia Chow and the city of Toronto declaring a food insecurity state of emergency back in 2024. Obviously, this hasn't shifted. So, what sorts of factors have influenced these staggering numbers that you're seeing, that you're mentioning, in terms of this increase in food bank usage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple answer to that. The high cost of living and inadequate wages are forcing people into deep poverty. You need to earn something like $27 an hour in Toronto to meet the poverty line.
Mm.
The minimum wage is about $17. So there's a huge gap there in terms of what you get and what you need. People on ODSP, they might get a $1,200 a month or so. People can't live off that. You are legislated to live in poverty. It's a very frightening thing. And very simply, cost of housing is very high in Toronto. Cost of living is very high. Wage growth is stagnant. Many people who rely on income supports, it's just not enough, quite simply.
Yeah, yeah, that's well put. And I'm wondering too, like, within that report, when you're looking at it around the 2020 mark and onwards, you see this like gigantic spike in terms of those that are accessing food banks and, increasing food insecurity. So can you speak a bit to that? Like, has the impact of the COVID pandemic in terms of access to resources, jobs, et cetera, in Toronto, has that influenced any of this at all as well?
Absolutely. So obviously, with the COVID pandemic, supply chains became broken, inflation rose, but the cost of living went up far
Yeah.
greater than the cost of wage growth. The COVID problem, the COVID pandemic really just created the perfect storm of all of these crises to converge, whether it's an opioid crisis, a housing crisis, a poverty crisis, on and on and on. So pre-pandemic, we're seeing about 70,000 client visits a month across our networks. And now we are around 350,000 client visits a month.
With that, one of the things that your reports identify is that we're not just seeing this short-term reliance on food banks that maybe was seen a few years back, and now it's this shift towards this long-term reliance on food banks for many people. What are some of the reasons that this long-term reliance has been so persistent in the last few years?
Well, it's just back to the fact that many of our the cost of living and the stagnant wages, those a lot of those issues haven't been addressed
Yeah.
effectively. We're not seeing a significant reduction of inflation. We're not seeing wage growth. We're not seeing housing costs and decline at a great enough rate that it'll solve that problem. Quite honestly, not a lot has changed to benefit people in the ways that they need. Right.
Yeah.
ODSP hasn't really increased. My old age pension hasn't increased with inflation the way it should. There's a lot of problems.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. When we're looking at Canada in comparison to other nations, we don't have any sort of national food policy, and there's not any collective social supports where it seems like in a lot of ways government tends to rely on that food banks will continue to support community instead of building in this like policy and social infrastructure to support making things more affordable too.
Yeah, food banks were never meant to be a permanent solution. It was a band-aid, and the intention of food banks wasn't to be this perpetual system that you need to be a part of. It was meant to be a stopgap for people that might be out of work or might be a little bit short, from week to week or time to time. It was never intended to be used this way.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we've come to this where the reality is that, like you say, 6% of the people that use our food bank are here minimum 3 times a month. They're here
Mm.
perpetually. This is a reality that they can't get out of. And once you get in the cycle of poverty, it is extremely hard to get out of.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of Daily Bread's response too, because this is such a massive shift into numbers that you're seeing, the numbers of meals that you have to prepare, how has Daily Bread grown and responded to this increased need?
Well, I mean, quite amazingly, from 2020 when we just started seeing a big growth, with basically in all levels of our
Yeah.
organization. The good people here at Daily Bread, we've banded together and we've taken this on, and we've just been doing our best to keep our head above water, right? And year over year, it's continuing to grow. We've added staff, and we've obviously changed the scope of what we do, but we've all just been working really, really hard to make sure that we're able to keep up with the demand. And that's obviously been through just really hard work, and hopefully, and I can say from my point of view, we're really hoping that things get back to normal soon, right? So
Yeah.
this hope that we experience, I think, is what's driving us to just keep plugging away day in, day out in the face of these growing numbers and in the face of this extreme poverty that we're witnessing. When you walk down the street in Toronto,
Hmm.
but you see lineups around these food banks. It's something that's no longer happening in the shadows, right? I think there was a time when, people using food banks, we knew it existed, but we didn't really get to see it. Well, those days are gone. Now, when I would pick my kid up from daycare, there would be a lineup around the block because the church that he would have his daycare class in was also a food bank on certain days of the week. And there
Hmm.
would literally be hundreds and hundreds of people lined up to try to access food. This is something it's now in your face. It's now something you can't deny. You see it and you realize this is a very, very substantial reality for a lot of people. And this is no longer something that we know exists, but we can't see.
Yeah, 100%. I think often too about the grocery store. I mean, it's one of those places where I never used to talk to people, and the amount of conversations I've had with seniors where they're like scrutinizing the cost of things just to make sure that they can stretch what they have from senior benefits to be able to buy groceries. I don't remember that 10 years ago, and it's been just this huge in your face visual shift too that you can't, as you said, you can't deny anymore.
Sadly, that's true.
Yeah. So I know Daily Bread does a lot of advocacy work as well. In your perspective and from what you've seen with Daily Bread too, what's needed to create more sustainable or affordable solutions for people that are going hungry right now?
Well, I mean, we need to address the housing crisis, and we need to bring down costs overall, and we need to be realistic about income supports for those in need in our country, in our city. Like I said, ODSP, it doesn't pay the bills. It's not enough. You know, you have people who have been deemed as though they are unable to work, and yet they are relegated to living in poverty, right? As a result,
Mm-hmm.
you need to work on income supports. OW is inadequate.
Mm-hmm. 100%. I think back to early COVID when a lot of my friends working in restaurants were let go because of the restaurant shutdowns and the universal basic income that people were afforded. That was for a lot of people that I knew, at least in Toronto, it was like the first time where they had some sort of stable income that often went way above and beyond what their wages were at the restaurant too. So it felt like it was for this brief moment things became more doable, and I think often back to that in terms of approaching or returning to that idea of universal basic income, because I feel like that kind of slipped through the conversational cracks in terms of policy too.
Yeah, and when the government, however they determine the number needed to keep people afloat during the pandemic, they somehow landed on a couple $1,000s a month. That's what CERB was offering. Meanwhile, ODSP is
Yeah,
still
nothing.
remains at $1,200, right? So it's strange that in one way they kind of acknowledge like that's basically the bare minimum, but in many other respects they seem okay with keeping some of those income supports at the levels they're at.
Yeah, yeah. It again, it's like one of those stark differences where once you see it, it's very clear, like in terms of values as well.
Absolutely.
So for people that are in a position to support, how can they support the work being done at Daily Bread?
Well, there's any number of ways you can help out. Obviously, you can donate funds, you can donate food, across most grocery stores or fire halls in the city. You'll see a Daily Bread box
Yeah.
where you can contribute food or whatever you would like to drop in there. It makes most sense, to be perfectly honest, to donate funds simply because we buying power is far greater than the average person. We buy truckloads of goods. We have a whole procurement department that works to buy, really, really good quality products at very good
Mhm.
prices. Obviously supporting the charity in any way you can is something that we rely on. But if that's obviously a luxury for a lot of people. Giving money or products. Another thing you could do to get involved is volunteer. Even more valuable in a way than money is time. And I'm constantly kind of impressed with just how much time some of our volunteers dedicate to
Yeah.
helping out with the cause here. They're here seven
Wow.
days a week. They are so dedicated. They want to be a part of everything. It's just an amazing, amazing group of people that are all kind of working towards just trying to help out in any way they can
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
donating time, money, or whatnot. These are the ways you can get involved. And it doesn't have to necessarily be here at Daily Bread. It could be at any agency around the city. It might be organizing a food drive at your kid's school. It could be just quite simply checking in on your neighbor next door and just making sure that everybody's doing okay. Right? I think a little bit more love and compassion
Yeah.
and understanding is something that would benefit us all. I mean, above and beyond, contributing to an organization.
Yeah, I firmly agree. And I think at least in the last few months, I've seen a bigger shift of people wanting to really build community. And I think what you're laying out is a perfect example of like how people can return to their community and build it up and feel that sense of hope too. And, even just in hearing you speak, I think I feel a little more hopeful hearing about all the hard work the volunteers are putting into.
We have an amazing group of volunteers. It's a privilege to work alongside them every day. To be perfectly truthful, I didn't volunteer much or at all even prior to working at Daily Bread. I mean, I worked for free a lot in the restaurant industry, but I never volunteered. Now I've been working here for almost 5 years. I've worked alongside many, many volunteers, from very, very different walks of life. I'm humbled by just the amount of dedication and passion that we get to see daily. And it's just so many people that just want to be a part of something great and helping out. If ever the situation where I had some time or I was out of a job, I mean, I would absolutely volunteer and just, form a community and work with like-minded people and roll up my sleeves to just try to make an impact, across our city. And we have volunteers that come through here and some of them are doing really interesting things, and many of them are doing things that would be very mundane to the average person, like sorting carrots or doing any number of those tasks. And I always tell them, I say, like, listen, I know like some of these tasks seem kind of, mundane or boring, but it all comes together to like every little bit contributes just to the product that we put out here and to the impact that we have across the city, which is very great.
Yeah, it's significant. And I think it's very tangible too, right? I mean, even if it seems like a mundane task, you know that that's going towards creating these meals and distributing them to such a huge population now too, right?
Absolutely. We've had a great conversation talking about, a lot of things that are, distressing and issues that seem very dire. But I want to end on a message of hope. And I want people to understand that even though we are going through a very precarious time where things feel very difficult, there are a lot of Canadians, people who feel as though they're not sure how things are going to turn out and whether we're going to be okay. I can tell you that working arm in arm with amazing like-minded people who are working together, to work towards long-term solutions for food insecurity and poverty. I am constantly filled with gratitude just for the amount of people that want to get involved and want to help. And there is an army of people out there who are looking to do everything they can to help one another. We have an amazing, amazing group of people, in Toronto and beyond who want nothing more than just to be able to lend a helping hand to those in need. Though we constantly talk about the doom and gloom about the situation we're in, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and the light at the end of the tunnel is provided by the amazing people that get involved and support these initiatives to help one another. And if there's one thing to take away here, is that we have risen to the occasion. We have seen massive growth. We have kept up with that growth.
Yeah.
And we will keep up with that growth as long as we have to make sure that everybody in our city is able to feel a sense of belonging and, if nothing more, have food on their table. The great takeaway of all of this is that I feel that we are going to be okay because I work and I see it every single day, not just in one or two people, across the entire organization and across our entire network in the city, people who are fighting every day to make sure that we are all able to turn the city into something that's sustainable and a place that we love and that we know that we love and can contribute to.
I really appreciate you sharing that because I think that's one of those pieces where, as you said, like, especially when you look at headlines, sometimes it can be so daunting or intimidating or overwhelming. And this conversation and what you've shared, I think, really illuminates how much people are working towards building a better future for everyone with this.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining me, for shedding some light on these important topics that I find don't always get talked about as much or as broadly as they need to be. Do you mind sharing where people can find Daily Bread online if they'd like to learn more, support, volunteer?
Sure. Yeah, you can go on to dailybread.ca website, and there's all sorts of great resources there. You can learn how to donate. You can read our reports, which are full of all sorts of interesting yet sobering statistics. And you can, if you're so inclined, get involved in kind of smaller grassroots efforts to help out with food insecurity around the city. I think that a great place to start is on our website, and you can see all sorts of really great stuff, including some of the testimonials from the clients that we serve and all the people that we help. And you can just really kind of see the scope of what we do here.
Awesome. I'll link that in the show notes. Well, thank you again, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Okay, so
that was Mike Greenberg of Daily Bread Toronto. I've linked the Daily Bread website, the Who's Hungry report, and social media in the show notes below if you want to follow along and learn more. You can also find all this at our website at anthodish.com under episodes. Thanks so much for tuning into the Anthodish podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help get the word out. For more Anthodish, you can find my newsletter at sarahdougnan.substack.com or find me on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, or Blue Sky at Anthodish Podcast. I always love hearing from you and what you're thinking about food. Music production was done by Lucas Wojcicki at lucasound.com. Anthodish is produced in partnership with the American Anthropological Association. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.